The cowboy got down on one knee in the mud of her yard, in front of God and 6 children and the whole staring town, and the proud men of Juniper Bend would argue for years afterward about exactly what they had witnessed that morning. His name was Caleb Foss, 42 years old, a drover who had ridden into the Montana high country with nothing but a good horse and a worse reputation, and he was kneeling not to propose and not to beg, but to do the simplest thing a man can do when he has finally decided where he belongs. He had taken off his hat. The rain had soaked through his collar, and he was looking up at a woman in a threadbare coat with a baby on her hip and exhaustion in every line of her face, and he said the 4 words that ended one chapter of her life and began another. "Let me stay," he said. "That's all. Just let me stay." Esther Quaid did not answer him for a long moment. The whole town held its breath. And to understand why those 4 words landed on her the way a warm coat lands on a body that has been cold for years, you have to go back to the winter the fever came, and the long, hard season of being called a fool. Esther was 37 that spring, and she had been a widow for 2 years. Her husband had been a fence builder and a stone mason, a steady, quiet man named Thomas Quaid, and he had died of a fever that swept through Juniper Bend one February and took 11 souls before the snow melted. He went peaceful at the last, in his own bed, with Esther holding his hand and the children asleep in the next room. He told her he was not afraid, and then he was gone, and Esther had buried him on the rise behind the house where the wild lupine came up purple every June. He left her with 6 children and a quarter section of hard ground and a debt at the bank that had seemed manageable when there were 2 backs to break against it. There was Sadie, 14, gone solemn beyond her years the night her father died and never quite young again. Asa, 12, who wanted to be the man of the house so badly it broke his mother's heart. Ned, 10, all elbows and appetite. Hattie, 8, who drew pictures of her father on every scrap of paper she could find. Gideon, 6, who had been too small to remember much and grieved the missing of a memory. And Posey, 4, the baby, born the autumn before the fever, who would grow up with no recollection of the man whose chin she had. 6 children, 1 woman, and a town that had decided, within a month of Thomas Quaid going into the ground, exactly what Esther ought to do. She ought to give them up. That was the wisdom of Juniper Bend, delivered kindly at first and then less kindly. A woman alone could not work a quarter section and raise 6 children and keep a roof over their heads. It could not be done. The Christian thing, the sensible thing, was to send the older boys to relatives back east, place the little ones with families who could feed them, and she found out on a Sunday, when she finally caught him at it. She came around the side of the barn at first light, and there he was, splitting her wood in the gray dawn, and he straightened up slow when he saw her, like a man caught at something shameful. For a moment neither of them spoke. "Why?" Esther said at last. It was not quite a question. It was a demand. Caleb Foss set the axe down. He was quiet so long she thought he would not answer at all. Then he said, in a low, rough voice that did not sound used to speaking, "I had a sister. Back home." He looked at the wood and not at her. "Widowed young, like you, 6 little ones like you, and there wasn't a soul in that whole town would lift a hand for her, on account of her husband had owed money and folks decided that made her less than them." He picked up a length of wood, turned it over, set it down again. She gave the children up in the end, not because she wanted to, because she was alone and a body can only carry alone for so long before it breaks. And I was off chasing my own trouble and wasn't there to put my back next to hers. By the time I came home it was done, and it could not be undone. And he stopped. She never was the same. The dawn was very quiet. Somewhere in the house a child was beginning to stir. "Then I rode into this town," Caleb said, "and I heard them all calling a woman a fool for refusing to break. for carrying it alone rather than give up a single child. He finally looked at her, and there was something in his face she had not expected, not pity, which she'd had her fill of, but something closer to reverence. And I thought, Lord, here's the one I was too late for. Come round again, and I'll be hanged if I'll be too late twice. The town, of course, made a story of that, too. When it got out that the silent stranger with the bad name was splitting the Quaid widow's wood and mending her fences, Juniper Bend buzzed with it. Some said he was after her land, what little there was. Some said worse. The same mouths that had called Esther a fool for keeping her children now called her a fool for letting a stranger close. And Esther, who had long since stopped living by the town's accounting, let them talk. But there was one man who did more than talk. His name was Royce Marsh, and he owned the ranch Caleb worked for, and he held the note on Esther's land, had bought it off the bank when the fever widows started failing, the way a certain kind of man waits below a cliff for what falls. He had offered, more than once, to take the Quaid place off Esther's hands for her own good, and she had refused him every time, and Royce Marsh was not a man accustomed to refusal. He fired Caleb Foss on a Tuesday, out of pure spite, the moment he understood where the man's loyalties had gone, turned him off without his last wages, and told him to be gone from the valley by Sunday. It should have ended things. A drover with no job and no pay had no business staying in a place that had cast him out, and every sensible voice in the country would have told Caleb Foss to saddle up and ride on, the way he always had. He did not ride on. He came to her yard that Sunday morning in the rain. The whole town was on the road to church and saw him do it, saw the man with no job and no money and no name worth having walk up to the Quaid place where 6 children stood in the doorway and get down on one knee in the mud and take off his hat. "I've got no work now," he told her, plain, with the rain running off him, "and no wages and no good name to give you, and I won't pretend otherwise in front of all these people. I've got 2 strong arms and a back that's not broke yet, and that's the whole of it." He looked up at her, at the baby on her hip, at the children behind her. "But I'm done riding past the people I was meant to stop for. I am done being too late. So I'm asking you, in front of God and this whole town that called you a fool." His voice caught and steadied. "Let me stay. Let me put my back next to yours. I don't ask to be loved, and I don't ask to be thanked. I just ask to stay and to carry what you've been carrying alone. That's all. Just let me stay." And Esther Quaid, who had not wept where the town could see her in 2 long years of being called a fool, stood in the rain with her children around her and felt the cold weight she had carried since the fever began, at last, to shift onto another's shoulders. "Then stay," she said. He stayed. He stayed through that summer and put up more hay than the place had seen in years. He stayed through the autumn and stood beside Esther in the bank in town and worked out with the manager a way to settle the note that Royce Marsh had thought would never be paid, because it turned out a silent man who'd ridden a hard road had saved more wages over the years than anyone guessed, having had no one, until now, to spend them on. He stayed through the winter, and when the children were sick he sat up with them, and when Hattie drew a picture of a tall man splitting wood and shyly handed it to him, he kept it folded in his coat against his heart for the rest of his days. They married in the spring, under the rise where Thomas Quaid was buried, because Esther said the dead are kind to the living, and her first husband had been the kindest man she knew and would not have begrudged her a second back to lean against. The town came, every soul that had called her a fool, and Esther let them come and fed them at her table and did not say a single bitter word, because she had learned in 2 hard years that bitterness is a debt you pay to people who have already stopped caring, and she would not waste another hour of her short life paying it. Royce Marsh did not come. He sold his ranch the following year and left the valley, and was not missed. As for the foolish widow and the man with no name worth having, they raised 6 children to adulthood under that one roof. Every one of them, just as she'd sworn she would. Sadie became a teacher. Asa got his wish and worked the land beside the only second father he'd let himself want. And on the long winter evenings when the house was loud with the children's children, somebody would sometimes ask Caleb Foss why he'd knelt in the mud that day for a woman with nothing. He would look across the room at Esther, gray now and unbowed, and he'd give the same answer every time. "She wasn't a fool," he'd say. "She was the bravest soul in that whole town, carrying all of them alone and refusing to set one down." He'd shake his head slow. "All I ever did was ask to help her carry it, and it's the best thing these 2 arms ever did."